Hello, John aka Chicken Fillets here. Now I have not long recently completed Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Yes, it is Game of the Year. Now before the release of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I did a video about my predictions for the game. Now, with this being said and done, I'm going to do another predictions video but for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. So with this all in mind, let's have a look at 20 predictions for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. Now before we get cracking on, if you like hearing a wee Scottish guy talk about JRPGs, Final Fantasy VII, etc., well, please consider subscribing to the channel. Anyway, let's get cracking on. Now of course, with this being a predictions video talking about the third Final Fantasy VII Remake title, well, there's going to be spoilers here, so take this as your spoiler warning for not only Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Final Fantasy VII Remake, the original Final Fantasy, and we'll also bring in Crisis Core and any of the other Final Fantasy VII related media. So let's kick things off with these 20 predictions. Let's start off with number 1. Now let's go for a kind of boring prediction, but I want to predict what the actual title of the game will be, because at the time of recording, we don't know what it'll be. So the title of this game, I predict, will be Final Fantasy VII Reunion. Now for me, this makes the most sense. There was a lot of things pointing towards this being the next title within Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. During the playthrough of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, there is a lot of emphasis of the reunion, with this being a strong point within the Final Fantasy VII story. For example, Cloud's journey to hand Sephiroth the Black Materia. This point in the game trilogy, well, this is where Cloud will actually hand over the Black Materia. This is where the reunion will happen within the Final Fantasy VII story at the Northern Crater. To further tie this together as well, we will finally see the reunion of Aerith and Zack within the live stream. I'm also tying this to the likes of Advent Children, because if you remember Advent Children, there is scenes where Aerith and Zack are together, which believes to be in the live stream. And as there's now question marks about Zack and both Aerith as well, with slight changes to the story, well, I believe that this could tie in nicely. And yes, I can already hear you saying, wait a minute, Crisis Core has already got the reunion title, they won't reuse it. Well, why not? Just because it's already on the prequel game doesn't mean that they can not reuse this title. It makes the most sense to me. Then next up, I want to look at the introduction, the first chapter of the game. Now at the end of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we see our party fly away in a tiny Bronco in the next part of their adventure. Now for this next part to work, I need you to remember as well that there is going to be an emphasis on the war with Wutai as well in the next game. Now if we follow the original story beats from Final Fantasy VII, we are looking to go on to the Northern Crater, also going through the small mountain town and having the snowboarding experience. Now our characters will aim to go to the Northern Crater via the tiny Bronco, but I feel that with the War of Wutai starting, I feel that our companions will be shot down and will land closely to the snowy village, which will then bring us to the Northern Crater. Now with the crash happening, this will also help with the resetting of the character stats and the materia, because as we've seen from Final Fantasy VII Remake moving on to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, a lot of the materia did not transfer across. So I feel that for the development side of things, well, this makes the most logical sense that they lose their materia within the crash. This would then lay out the foundations for the remainder of the story, having the most important thing which happens in the Final Fantasy VII story happen earlier on in the game, which would set off a chain of events for the rest of the third title. The end of Chapter 1 will see Cloud finally hand over the Black Materia to Sephiroth, which awaits in the Northern Crater. Now, this actually leads me on to the third prediction, which will be the world map. Now, there's already been an established world map within Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but we need change with any sort of game. Now,
it falls straight onto the story beats and why the world will look different compared to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, you may remember from the original Final Fantasy VII that Tifa and Barret wake up in Junon under tight security. And this is where we see the arrival of Meteor in the skies, and Barret makes a comment that the weapons have been causing havoc around the world. And you even see this on the world map, where beside Junon there is a massive crater. The developers can use this to their advantage with the story. They can show the real devastation that the weapons are causing by having changes within the world map. So for example, the Mithril mines, I believe, will be gone from this. You don't really have a reason to go back to that area in the original Final Fantasy. And in the original Final Fantasy, well, we had an area in Junon which was blasted away. That could be that area which has been showing the devastation of these attacks. I think the world map will relatively stay the same size. I know there'll be 1 or 2 different islands added in, so we'll have the likes of the Isles where Midel is, and the likes of Wutai, that'll be added, and then we'll get to adventure further into the northern continent, but I feel there's not going to be much other expansions to the world map. Another example for this is Midgard. We still won't be able to get to that area. We will still be able to go to Midgard via the story beats which happen in the original Final Fantasy VII, where we go back to Midgard, but I believe we won't really have a way to walk up to Midgard. That's a way I can kind of think of it in my head. Now with prediction number 4, let's talk about the combat system. Now I believe that the combat system will basically remain the same. They'll be fine-tuned, but I don't really see any more additions to it. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's battle system is fantastic with the likes of the synergy systems, but what I believe is this will just be fine-tuned to make this experience even quicker and better. And also when it comes to actually dishing out the focal points which help build up your synergy skills, I think this will probably be streamlined as well. Now prediction number 5, let's actually talk about super bosses for once. Let's talk about Emerald Weapon and let's talk about Ruby Weapon. I believe that these will still be optional bosses. We will still battle Ultimate Weapon, we will still battle Diamond Weapon, but these two will still be seen as challenges for players. For many years, Emerald Weapon and Ruby Weapon have been the thing of nightmares for many gamers. So I feel that Square Enix will lean into this and make these two behemoths even worse. These super bosses will bring out all the stops and will really challenge all the veteran Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Remake players. Now these super bosses won't be available straight away to battle. You're going to have to do side quests to get to these boss fights, similar to the likes of the Proto Relic side quest. Now talking of Emerald Weapon, where do we fight him? Well, it's under the water, which brings us on to our next prediction. Yes, it is the submarine. Like the original Final Fantasy VII, we will have access to this submarine once again, and we'll be able to explore under the water. Now we'll be able to find the key to the Cetra, which we use in the City of the Ancients. And one way or another, will be the place that we'll be able to have our fight with Emerald Weapon. I believe it won't be a massive area that we'll be able to explore with the submarine, but still, it's some fun that we'll have. Now prediction number 7, we've just previously talked about being under the sea, but let's talk about being in the air, and let's talk about the Highwind. Now if the developers haven't figured out how to do the air travel within this game, if they want to take this point, well, you're more than welcome, Square Enix. Now in the original Final Fantasy VII, we're able to fly around the world map at our own pace and land anywhere in the world. Now with Final Fantasy VII, I believe this will be done slightly differently. We'll be given the illusion that we can fly the Highwind anywhere we want, but we will only be able to land at the airfields which were established in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So when we were able to land anywhere in the original world map, this won't be the case anymore, and this does actually make sense. There will be the quick travel option where the Highwind will just go straight to the place and load in straight away, or it will actually give you the option to fly yourself to this area. And you know what, whilst we're talking about the Highwind, let's talk about the 8th prediction here. Let's talk about the interiors of the Highwind, because we will have this as a sort of hub for our characters. We'll be able to use this as a base of operations within the game. We'll be able to have our Chocobos, because there is a Chocobo ranch, which we'll bring on to our next prediction. We'll also be able to have our stores, and we'll be able to possibly have a combat simulation suite, because guess what? Another prediction's coming as well related to this. Now let's talk about the Chocobos with this next prediction. Now, with the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, when you went to different areas, there were different styles of Chocobos. So there was the River Chocobo, there was Pika, who was our original Chocobo in the grasslands. So the next Final Fantasy is going to bring back a staple of Final Fantasy VII. Yes, we are going to see the return of the Chocobo breeding. This will be used as a side quest and probably used within the Chocobo racing scenario as well, just to spice things up a wee bit more. Now, I mentioned as well earlier on about a simulation suite within the Highwind, which brings us on to our next prediction. Yes, Chadley will definitely be back in the 3rd entry.
I hope to create a ship of my own one day, perhaps even an airship. You'll have to join me on its maiden voyage.
I believe Chadley's services will be available within the Highwind as well. He'll somehow become a stowaway within the team. He won't actually travel with our companions, but he will be on the Highwind to give his assistance with the likes of the simulation suite. So yes, the VR training missions will be back once again. Hooray! Now, I mentioned Chadley returning. What about returning characters? Well, let's talk about Zack Fair. I believe that this time round, Zack Fair will still be making appearances similar to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but this will be about his story to find Aerith within the livestream. This will also give us world building with Aerith and Zack, and we'll finally see the reunion happen between them.
Me? Gungaga.
Now, with my 11th prediction, let's talk about the length of the story, the length of the gameplay in general. Now, if we do a comparison to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, well, to complete just the story alone, you're looking at around 35 to 40 hours worth of gameplay. And with a blueprint already in place with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, this is what I feel would be the perfect length for story. Now, with the groundwork already laid out by Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, this will be another completionist's dream, because this will provide 100 plus hours as well with side content and world building. Now, with this in mind, let's talk about prediction number 12, which is the side quests. Yes, the side quests will be back. The groundwork has been laid, so this is pretty much a lock-in with it. It will follow the same format as well, I would believe. There may be some minor differences here. So for example, instead of having the proto relic quest, then it could be something related to, I don't know, maybe the Knights of the Round Table, or if we go back to the golden Chocobo, you know, the Chocobo breeding, that could be included as well. Now, we can all agree that both Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth threw in new story beats, which was fantastic for the story. So let's actually talk about my 13th prediction, which is new story beats which are going to be added in. Now, for this prediction, I want to actually focus in purely on Yuffie Kisaragi. During our playthrough of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Yuffie Kisaragi brings up Nero and Deep Ground and what happened during intermission. These points were highlighted during the Temple of the Ancients. Now, I would like to believe that when our party go back to Midgar, this is where the path will slightly differentiate from the original, and we will take on Deep Ground as a part of this trip. As Deep Ground are linked with Shinra, I believe that Hojo for some way or another, will have Deep Ground working for him whilst he tries to fire the sister ray at the northern crater. And to sprinkle a little bit more onto this, well, we've got a link with Dirge of Cerberus as well. Let's throw Vincent Valentine into this as well.
Cool.
Now with returning characters, let's talk about prediction number 14. Let's talk about a Crisis Core character. Let's talk about Genesis. Now, as we have seen, Sephiroth can manipulate the livestream and can also manipulate the black hooded figures, as we've seen with the likes of Glenn within Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So what's to say that Genesis can't be brought back to the fold within the livestream to antagonise Zack Fair once again? Having another threat looming over our party, and it's up to Zack and Aerith to defeat Genesis in the background as well. Let's talk about a certain scene including Cid, Highwind and a cup of goddamn tea. Now in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we met Cid Highwind in a completely different fashion. We didn't meet him in Rocket Town. Now I think this scene will make an appearance in the next Final Fantasy, but with some slight tweaks to it. Our companions will go to Rocket Town and Cid will visit Shira, but this time round when he says those fated lines, "Sit down and drink your goddamn tea," well, Shira is going to have absolutely none of it. It is an iconic scene, but with today's standards, it doesn't really fly, so let's have Shira actually fight back a wee bit against Cid. Now, in my last predictions video for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, well, I predicted, and I was wrong, unfortunately, that a certain character would make an appearance, a certain enemy, should I say. I was hoping for the return of the Triceratops tank, which you fight in Gongaga. However, my guess was incorrect, so maybe this time round Square Enix will pull the trigger, especially when we had a funny boss fight against Palmer in a frog-like robot suit. Why not have a totally different suit that you can fight in, which is the Triceratops tank? Now, prediction number 17's got to do with Costa del Sol. Now, in the original Final Fantasy VII, we are given the chance to buy a property within Costa del Sol. Now in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, we have our red-headed friend Johnny actually have his own hotel there. So let's just say we have a certain side quest added to the game, including Johnny. Let's have some fun with this one. I want to predict that Johnny's hotel is either burned down to the ground or taken away from him, and it's up to us to raise the funds to buy him a new hotel so he can run his business. I think this would be such a funny little side quest because anytime Johnny appears on the screen, he is a utter joy. And with a world of doom and gloom ahead of us with the third title, well, this would be a nice comic relief for the story. Now, for this next prediction, let's talk about when we will actually be able to control Cid Highwind, because I believe in my mind that Cid Highwind's not going to be playable straight away. I want to believe that Cid Highwind's going to be available for us to play in Chapter 3. Now, there is reasoning behind this. If we are following my previous logic and following Final Fantasy VII OG's original story, well, we know that Cloud falls into the life stream and is out of the party for a good chunk of that game. So we control Tifa first of all when she is escaping Junon. So I believe at first we're going to control Tifa for Chapter 2 up until she discovers the whereabouts of Cloud. Now at this point, the Chapter 3 will hand over to Cid Highwind because it's Barrett who makes him the leader of the party. Thus, we finally get to control Cid Highwind. This to me would build up excitement for the player to finally be able to play as Cid Highwind, because Cid was a part of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but he was just basically the transportation for you. Now, prediction number 19 is the ending. How will Final Fantasy VII Part 3 end? Well, to be honest with you, I feel that the ending will basically be note for note the same as the original. which could be a very dangerous move, to be quite honest with you. Our party will defeat Safer Sephiroth. They will have the iconic battle with the one-winged angel. Cloud will finally defeat Sephiroth at the edge of creation, and a similar sort of FMV will play out like the original Final Fantasy VII. I honestly think we're going to have a ominous ending with this to match Final Fantasy VII, and we will see as our last cutscene Aerith rising her head like the original Final Fantasy VII and the beginning of Final Fantasy VII Remake, thus sparking off a magnitude of fan theories about the ending and complaints, no doubt. Now, prediction number 20 is, will this be the end of Final Fantasy VII once the third and final entry of this trilogy comes out? I want to tell you that I really think that they will try and carry on with more Final Fantasy VII related content. And this is actually linked because of Ever Crisis. Whether it comes in the shape of DLC, I believe that we will get some sort of playable version of Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. For me, who absolutely adores Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, this, and probably to a lot of gamers, would be a dream come true. Final Fantasy VII is one of Square Enix's biggest properties, and I really do not think they're going to be stopping the train anytime soon. Even if it's just passing it on to other parts of the creative teams within Square Enix, I do believe that we will see more Final Fantasy VII even after the trilogy ends. So there we have it, 20 predictions for the next Final Fantasy VII installment. What were your thoughts? Do you have any predictions of your own? You know what to do by now, let me know in the comments down below. Now if you like what you're hearing and seeing on the channel, well, please help me grow it by liking, sharing and subscribing. And if you want to be kept up to date with everything Chicken Fillets, well, hit that notification bell. This has been John, aka Chicken Fillets, and until next time, tatty bye!